Hello and welcome. My name is Sancya. I'm an astrologer, a medicine maker, a priestess, and a writer. And I'm guesting today on the Law of Positivism podcast in a solo show to talk about Black Moon Lilith's 9-month journey through Scorpio. Now, for those of you who don't know about Lilith, I will go into a kind of basic mythic and astrological explanation. I'll also touch on what Lilith actually is in the sky. But I think what I want to explore more deeply is the way that this part of nature, part of the wider web of life, can serve as a catalyst for great healing and transformation because the themes of Lilith are some of the most painful, sticky, deep, and repressed themes that we have. And Lilith is at home in Scorpio. This is the sign where she is exalted and strong, and where really the essence of her nature is revealed to us. So, before we begin, I'd like to invite you to take a deep breath wherever you are. If you're in the car or in your office or cleaning your kitchen, just taking a deep breath in, sighing out through the mouth, landing in the body, landing in the heart. So let's talk about Lilith. Some of you may know her from the stories of the Garden of Eden. She was the first wife of Adam. And this is old Jewish, Old Testament stories. Now, the idea is that she and Adam were both made from the earth, both created equal from the soil. But conflict arose when Lilith wanted to be on top. And this wasn't happening. There was a power struggle. And so she fled. She self exiled from the Garden of Paradise and so she sort of went to the Badlands. She went out into the desert. And there she copulated with these demons and spawned a whole lot of demon children. And, God wasn't too happy about it because he needed a male and a female in the garden to create life and spawn the human race. So he sent 3 angels, and these angels came and threatened Lilith and said, if you don't go back, we're going to start killing your children. And so that's what happened. They started killing her children, hundreds of her demons spawn, and she just became more and more mad and wrathful and crazier and uh, demonic herself until, you know, on we go. And so God kind of gave up on the Lilith project and took a rib from Adam's body and made Eve his subservient female partner. The idea that she was made from Adam kind of creates this natural hierarchy to avoid the conflict that came from Lilith and Adam both being made from the soil, from the dust. As we know in the story of the Garden of Eden, there's then this development with the tree of life, the tree of good and evil, and Eve being tempted by a snake, by a serpent that ascends up through the trunk and the branches of the tree of knowledge and tempts Eve with this fruit. I believe that that snake was Lilith, and that the knowledge that came from Eve eating the apple, and apples are interesting too because apples are actually part of the rose family. They are connected to Venus, they are connected to the Divine Mother in lots of different ways. And when Eve ate that apple and received all that knowledge, the original sin, this was a process of her becoming whole again. And so when we look at it from that perspective, and that is really just one of the more well-known stories about Lilith, if we look further back in time, we start to see mentions, for example, in Sumerian myth of the Lilitu, these wind spirits, these kind of demonic, troublesome beings that live again out in the deserts. And this predates those Abrahamic stories of Lilith. So, as with so many things, the original myths kind of get transformed through time as culture changes. And Lilith has definitely taken the rap for the wild and the primal feminine, as patriarchal cultures rose and as there was this increasing repression and control over the kind of wild, undomesticated, primal, sensual, dynamic, feminine face of God, so too did Lilith become progressively darker, more demonic, more destructive, more unsafe. And so, with this context, we can understand why now, fast forward a couple of thousand years, Lilith is the queen of demons. She is seen as being very dangerous. In fact, there are long traditions of casting spells to bind Lilith in chains to protect her from harming unborn children or pregnant mothers, or coming into men's dreams to cause kind of wet dreams or erotic dreams where they might lose some of their energy, in their sleep. She's a very demonized character. And at the same time, she has been interpreted as being representative of the exiled parts of us and standing up and saying no to these predatory patriarchal forces. She's become a feminist icon. She's become a symbol for that resistance against those forces that seek to dominate and repress the feminine. And I would say that all of this is true. All of this is true, but as an astrologer, I'm very interested in, yes, myth, yes, stories, yes, tracking transits in astrology. I'm also very interested in the embodied experience, the direct felt experience of working with planets in different points. And as someone who has pretty strong Lilith in my chart, I can say that working with her directly is so much more, so much more than just F the patriarchy, a lot more. She really does contain the full spectrum of our distorted, wounded, repressed, and also unconscious wounding, a lot of that wounding that's passed down through feminine lines, a lot of that wounding that's to do with sexual or fertility based things or psychological or psychic wounds and abuse. She becomes the reservoir for a lot of that content. And so when Black Moon Lilith is activated, um, initially, especially, a lot of that needs to be faced, and that can express to varying degrees based on the individual, right? So what is Lilith? Yeah, because Lilith is not a planet. Lilith is not an object. We've got the Earth. The moon's orbiting the Earth, and the moon doesn't orbit the Earth in a perfect circle. It orbits the Earth on an elliptical angle. And Black Moon Lilith is the moon's apogee, the lunar apogee, which is the furthest distance from Earth at any one time which the moon can get. So that's interesting. When we just contemplate that, it starts to show us a lot. I do want to also mention that there is an asteroid Lilith, which, I mean, I also work with, especially if I'm doing readings looking at Lilith. Asteroid Lilith is an object, and it has a different delineation. For me, asteroid Lilith really relates to the flight response, the part where you put up your hand and say, no, I'm out of here, enough. She's that quick, intense, primal, adrenal reaction and response to having to coming under threat in certain ways. So, asteroid Lilith, Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith is the lunar apogee, the moon's furthest point in space from Earth at any one given time. In addition to that, this point actually organically bounces around really wildly. It's very erratic. And if you track the true Black Moon Lilith, you will notice that it's just jumping backwards and forwards between signs, really wild. And I love looking at true Lilith, especially on a day-to-day basis, to dive deeper into certain activations. And there are some very wonderful astrologers who work with true Lilith and their reasoning behind it. I get it. However, what resonates for me, especially for looking at broader themes, broader collective themes, broader periods of time, is the mean calculation. So that is averaging out where she is and tracking it like that. Now, it seems a little counterintuitive to kind of try and tame Lilith and be like, no, she's in Scorpio now. But as long as we understand that there's both a mean and a true calculation, we can look at both for different reasons. And again, the astrology is just, it is a map into the territory of the lived experience for the purpose of evolution. That's my approach to astrology. And so understanding how to read the map and knowing how the map functions is super important. And yet there's a whole spectrum within that too. So when I'm talking about Black Moon Lilith being in Scorpio for 9 months, yes, the same amount of time as a human gestational cycle, that is what I'm talking about, that mean averaged out calculation. So let's get back to talking about Black Moon Lilith being this lunar apogee, this extreme distance in the moon's orbit around Earth. The moon is a mood ring. In astrology, the moon is this filter or this emotional lens through which we experience life. It's what gives us comfort. If you want to win someone over, knowing how to appeal to their moon sign is really good because it just makes them feel cozy and at home. The moon is also very related to the mother and the womb and the waters of the womb, because we know that the moon is intricately connected to the tides. It pulls the ocean. It has this gravitational impact on the waters that exist on Earth. And you maybe hear this little dog walking around. I'm dog sitting today. Stanley, just don't stop barking, okay? So the waters, humans are like 98% water. We are made of water. We are very watery beings. And in astrology, the waters do tend to reflect our emotional, psychic, intuitive, creative, sensual experiences. When we look at Black Moon Lilith being this most extreme point in the moon's orbit, we can, from all of that, delineate that she is the magnetic point drawing us to the most extreme edges of those lunar terrains, those lunar qualities, the womb, the emotions, the psyche, the imagination, the psychic, intuitive bandwidth that we have. Black Moon Lilith shows up in experiences of emotional or psychic extremes and intensity, and yet being pushed to the absolute threshold of where something goes is often the point at which a initiatory change happens, where something can go no further. In that moment, there can be this sort of sudden collapse into the absolute deepest core of the experience. So, giving birth, for example, it's often women are experiencing, especially for the first time, they're experiencing contractions. Their body is going into this very instinctive process, especially if they are able to have the opportunity of having a relatively um, like minimal intervention in the birth. It's not always possible, but when natural birth is happening, or um, wild birth is happening, let's say, or even an animal giving birth, there is just a full primal cascade of hormones and instincts, and almost going into an altered state, a trance, as the womb contracts and prepares to send this child out the birth canal and into the world, to cross a threshold from one contained watery space out into an entirely new dimension. that extreme moment of going into this place that it's just beyond anything else that occurs. And sometimes there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of intensity often. And then, I've heard women describe it's like a shift happening, and then they're just in it. They're just in the core of the experience. That's a very kind of Lilith type of an experience. The other, which is interesting as well, because Lilith is also very associated with infertility and miscarriages and the death of children and trouble conceiving and things like this. And I think the reason that is that as the moon, as being the moon's most extreme point, she represents the most extreme experiences that people who have wombs have. And because she's magnetic, she's this, like a void point, she's absorbing and devouring and containing all of those extreme experiences, which also include abuse, repressed sexual energy, repressed or exiled rage, emotion, intuition. And this carries on through lineages, through especially through female lines. When we look at the myth of Lilith, that exile, that leaving the garden to save herself and then becoming demonized, and then what happens over time to those exiled fragments, those repressed parts of psyche and spirit and self, is that they can grow in the shadows. They can become these festering, obsessive, manipulative, very dark survival responses to the unintegrated power of knowing how to be with those lunar extremes. I mean, lunacy, a lunatic, it's a very interesting terrain, okay? So let's talk about the obsession and the primal nature of Lilith, the snake that has its belly on the earth, that is poisonous, that sheds its skin, the snake that is the kundalini rising up the spine, just like a snake climbed up the tree of good and evil in the story. That energy, that serpent energy, right? It Yeah, I just think of Saint Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland, and the colonization of Ireland by the Catholic Church, and the extremely rich pagan Celtic religion that was there previously. Um, Saint Patrick driving the snakes out, that is such a wonderful metaphor for Lilith, right? And then what happens? There is a split. There is an exile. There is exiled parts of the self that are unable to be accessed or expressed or learnt how to deal with, because these experiences of the self don't go away. They don't. It is literally impossible to completely eliminate this primal feminine energy, and it still exists everywhere in nature. It exists in a storm, it exists in a raging river, it exists in a volcano. We literally, no matter how hard we try, we're never going to win at this game. And yet here we are. When I talk about these sort of things like obsession, I think because Scorpio, Lilith and Scorpio, why does she rule Scorpio? Why is Scorpio her home sign? I sometimes call Lilith the Plutonic feminine. She's like a feminine face of the Pluto archetype, this very, very deep experience. Scorpio is a fixed water sign. It's fixed, it's deep, it goes all the way in and down. And in the northern hemisphere, which is what the Western zodiac is kind of based on in terms of the seasons, Scorpio season is Beltane, it's Halloween, it's the time of when the dead, it's the decomposing where everything is going back into compost. It's the letting go, right? And when we think about scorpionic themes, power, sex, taboos, um, everything that's buried and hidden under the surface, money, because of its relationship to the inter-exchange and circulation of power, the giving and receiving, the regenerative qualities. Just like a snake shedding its skin and sliding out more venomous and powerful and freshly fanged up, snakes are also very associated with the sign of Scorpio, even though its symbol is a scorpion. Snakes kind of, they fit the brief for Scorpio. And when we see Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, we're also considering these lunar themes, like the moon itself is in fall in Scorpio. It's the most uncomfortable place, the most debilitated place for the moon to be, because the moon itself wants to be comfy. It wants to be grounded and cozy and stable and predictable. It wants to be in Taurus terrain, Taurus, the opposite sign. Food and pleasure and predictability and, all of those things. Black Moon Lilith is the moon's apogee. She's the extreme outer reaches of the moon's experience. And so this is why in Scorpio she shows up. She says, where do you refuse to go in feeling what's there? Where is your capacity and your willingness, both of them, constricted or shut down in this kind of shadow Scorpio way, which is all about control and refusing to change and refusing to look at things and being obsessed with having power over not feeling the intensity of whatever's there. And rightly so. There's overwhelm. There's actual nervous system bodily functions that put us into freeze states, for example, when it's just too much. I get it, I get that. And yet the medicine of Scorpio is about this digestion of sensation and intensity and frozen, locked up, watery, fixed water, which is emotion, psychic information, sexual energy, libido, all of that, where it gets stagnant and swampy and funky and festers. This is when Scorpio is at a stage in its evolution where it requires transformative medicine, where it requires sometimes catharsis and extremes. And that is where Black Moon Lilith comes in. She comes in with these extreme experiences in order to liberate, transform, reveal, devour the content that is found there. So we can see with Black Moon Lilith and Scorpio why she's so strong, and look to history to explore what have her other transits through Scorpio brought up for us collectively and personally, and where do we see some things coming back around again? Okay, so in my research, I like to research. It's a great way to look at any transit, right? So last time that Lilith was in Scorpio, first of all, let me tell you that now Lilith is going to be in Scorpio from the 28th of March. So she's in the early degrees of Scorpio now until the December 21st solstice, when she moves into Sagittarius. Very interesting that she moves on the solstice. Powerful moment, very powerful moment. The last time she was in Scorpio was from April 2016 until February 2017. Now, as I was looking into what was happening in the world, significant things related to these themes of female sovereignty, feminine sovereignty, of the primal, natural, organic, wild aspect of the feminine, which is also nature, right? What I found is that the Standing Rock protests happened in almost precise alignment with that transit. So I believe that Black Moon Lilith, sorry, she entered in May of 2016. She entered Scorpio. The protests started in April, so only a month before, and a couple of weeks actually. And then when that camp was forcibly broken up was February 2017, Valentine's Day. And that is the same month that Black Moon Lilith, mean calculation, left Scorpio. So almost a precise alignment, yeah. And this really hit me. I had a visceral reaction because while I'm talking about these very personal manifestations of Lilith, the ways that she can generate obsession, when people get obsessed and are manipulative and are kind of doing this crazy, seductive, dark, feminine, twisted Lilith stuff that people are like, oh, she's a demon, and she can be very demonic. All of that behavior is coming from unmetabolized overwhelm. When we're obsessing, it's because we're fixating on something the mind is trying to get away from, the deeper waters, the deeper feelings, the deeper unprocessed scorpionic taboo material, the things that we cannot, will not, or do not acknowledge or meet. We're terrified of admitting some of the things that we desire. We're terrified of admitting the grief, of meeting it, the secrets about the things that have happened in the world and in our lives, or the sheer horror of the reality that there is just a lot of loss, a lot of loss. Scorpio is about loss and about decay. And we live in a youth and growth obsessed culture. We do not have a healthy relationship with the process of dying and letting go, which is all Scorpionic territory, because we've lost our connection to the greater cosmology and the greater understanding that when your body is eaten by the worms, you go back into the cycle of life, and that's the only place you ever came from. The split, when Lilith left the garden, when the primal feminine left the Garden of Eden, and this split came in mythically, culturally, and then we spent thousands of years reinforcing it, living it, intentionally binding and splitting that primal feminine. We split ourselves from nature, and we made ourselves terrified of the inevitable, in this kind of fruitless pursuit of controlling everything, right? So let me get back to Standing Rock. If you don't know about it, Standing Rock basically was a protest by the Dakota Sioux Indigenous Native Americans and their allies against a crude oil pipeline that was being built through sacred lands, native lands that had been protected by a treaty that had been done between the Sioux Nation and the American government. And there was a company called Energy Transfer Partners who wanted to build this pipeline through this sacred land and really put at danger the Missouri River, which provided drinking water and important sacred waters to millions of people downstream. Now, it's so Scorpionic. I mean, rivers are snakes. Anyone who has spent a lot of time with rivers knows that they are snakes, they are dragons. The body of a river, an indigenous animist perspective that has a really living relationship with more than human beings, including rivers, mountains, rocks, forests, plants, animals, many stories know that rivers are dragons, and this is something that I too know. Very Scorpionic. The snake, the serpent, Lilith enters Scorpio. We've got an issue with a river where crude oil, a fuel, a highly expensive black sticky substance from deep below the earth, very Scorpionic, has been pulled up, and this Energy Transfer Partners are wanting to build this pipeline threatening the health and the well-being of this water. Massive paradigm clash, right? Because Indigenous peoples who have been colonized and exiled, uh, and also refugees, very strong Lilith archetypes, the archetypes of exile and return. Exile, what happens when you're exiled, the the high levels of trauma, alcoholism, domestic violence, and things like that that we see in native populations that have been colonized is very Lilithian territory, right? It's this unmetabolized grief from going through these processes of being in a lunar extreme, a psychic and emotional split from the cycle of life. When I look at the way that the kind of main dates of the Standing Rock protest played out, I mean, we're going to unpack this more deeply. I'm running a masterclass called Deeper Waters, which is all about the Lilith and Scorpio transit, where we're going to go deeper into this Standing Rock story. We're also going to go deeper into what Lilith and Scorpio means for each of the zodiac signs. We're going to look at key dates for the transit, and we're going to do some embodiment work, which enables you to kind of directly contact this psychosomatic current inside your own being, right? Direct experience. That's how we work with the feminine. But a couple of the things that just really stood out for me was that North Dakota in winter is freezing. Howling winds, snow, ice. These protesters, many, many women, many, many people camping in this freezing cold scorpionic, because fixed water, one of my teachers, he used to describe it like a glacier. It's frozen. There was a lot of ice and Lilith, the winds, Um, what happened is that during that time, there were private security firms, so mercenaries, killers, basically, and the archetype of the mercenaries, because Scorpios is a Mars ruled sign, but it's covert. It's not like Aries Mars that just races out with like bravado and weapons. It's intelligence and strategy and operations, and it comes in with the blade and it cuts your throat while you're asleep. That's and it's kind of there's a very revenge focused shadow. The scorpions, the sting and the tail, that is part of this too. And there was big themes of revenge that came up. Revenge, strategy, conspiracy, corruption, a lot of these dark Scorpio themes. Something incredible though that happened. So there's these mercenaries that are showing up, they're fire hosing and using mace on people in freezing temperatures. They are using attack dogs. They are, there was some really horrific treatment of these protesters. In the end, like one really beautiful thing that happened, and this is interesting to me because in my initiations with Black Moon Lilith, the relationship with the natural world and the power of the natural world has been the medicine. It has been the thing that has come into the gaping wounds of being faced with the destruction and the distortion and the pain that is held in the reservoir of Black Moon Lilith's experiences. So on October 27th, 2016, there was a herd of buffalo that appeared at the camp. And buffalo are incredibly sacred to the Plains Indians. And they used to roam, in herds of millions, up to a million animals in a herd. And for them to appear in this moment and to come so close to the camp was a very good omen. It was a sacred symbol. It was a symbol of Mother Earth, of nature, of the wider web of life, being in support and recognizing and mirroring back to the protesters. We see you, we're with you, we hear you. I mean, I just have full body chills and tears brewing up in my eyes as I talk about this because, well, one, the moon's at 29 Scorpio today. But it's just, I looked at the chart, I looked at the astrology chart, and Mercury, the messenger, was exactly conjunct the sun in Scorpio on that day. So the sun illuminated the message of Scorpio, and the messenger was right there to deliver it, and the buffalo appeared. The other very interesting thing about this is that during that entire time, asteroid Lilith was in Aquarius, the sign of the people, the collective, the tribe. Aquarius rules the 11th house, which is about groups of people, tribes of people, collective belonging, um, decentralized power, like horizontal forms of power. Um, you know, I watched a video with one of the key organizers of the Standing Rock protest, and he said, when the security forces came looking for me, I said to them, "You're looking for one chief, for one Indian chief. You've been looking for one chief for thousands of years, but sorry, for hundreds of years. You're never going to find the one chief that you can take down because I do not control those Indians on that hill. I'm a leader, but I do not control them." That's a very Aquarian statement. And now, jump forwards to 2025, what year is it? We have Pluto in Aquarius for the next 20 years, making a squared aspect to Lilith and Scorpio for the start of her transit. The presence of asteroid Lilith in Aquarius during that protest, and making various aspects to Black Moon Lilith, that protest was such a symbolic change. It was such a symbolic development in terms of protest in the United States, but it had world attention, and there was a lot of US Army veterans that showed up, and it really changed the story around Indigenous land sovereignty, around police and government brutality, around the corruption of these energy companies. And as things progressed, it turned out that in December of 2017, the Obama administration did actually sign up and say, like, let's stop this pipeline. And it seems like there was a victory, right? But then Donald Trump had just been elected for the first time. And it turns out that he had donated around $100,000 to that company, to the Energy Transfer Partners company who were building the pipeline. And Kelsey Warren, the CEO, had donated huge amounts to Donald Trump's campaign. So they were in it, other people's money. This is Scorpio stuff, eighth house, other people's money. And as soon as Donald Trump came back into power, he immediately sent in forces to forcibly remove the camp, and the camp was broken up in February of 2017, just as Black Moon Lilith was leaving Scorpio. It was an incredibly transformative, traumatic, and powerful experience. I watched a video about it this morning before doing this talk, and I was just sobbing, honestly, because what was awakening in my body was this absolute love for the immensely sacred power of nature, for the grief and the love that kind of just winds together, where it's like the corruption. I mean, now we have Lilith back in Scorpio, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 8 years later, and we've got Donald Trump back in power again. We've got developments with the Standing Rock the case in terms of environmental assessment of the pipeline and its risks and stuff like that. And we have a whole lot of these themes coming back up for another look. I find it extremely potent that this relationship between Black Moon Lilith and Pluto is playing out in Scorpio and Aquarius. So if you have especially in the earlier degrees of the fixed signs, so Scorpio, Taurus, Aquarius, and Leo, this Black Moon, Lilith, and Scorpio transit will be particularly potent for you. Other key dates to watch as we just start winding up here are, let me see here, I'm going to have a little look on my chart. Okay, when are we going to have the next full moon? I definitely think, like, one of the really interesting things that's happening is that in coming months, there's going to be a pile up. I mean, first of all, the first really important date is the upcoming Taurus new moon. That is on the 25th of April. That is when I'm holding Deeper Waters. My, sorry, the 25th of May. That is when I'm holding my masterclass. And this new moon in Taurus is absolutely potent. It not only will be the sun and the moon together. Hold on. Hold the phone. Let me get this together. Yeah. I'm in the flow and I didn't have the chart. Okay. So here we are. The sun in the early degrees of Taurus, around 7 degrees of Taurus, opposite Black Moon, Lilith, and Scorpio. Black Moon, Lilith, and Scorpio making a exact square, a confronting, frictiony aspect to Pluto and Aquarius, power to the people, revolution, showing the corruption that comes from trying to control everybody and make everybody the same, but also where is like modern technology and leaps in the way that groups of people are being controlled. Pluto has lots to do with control. Where is that going to be squashing up against Lilith? These squares are like they are adjustments that need to be made. They are turning points. They create friction and dynamism. And asteroid Lilith is also in Aquarius, just like she was 8 years ago during the Standing Rock protests. On that full moon in Taurus, this is on the 28th of April 2025, sorry, just to get the dates right, Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, will be in direct opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. So there's actually a grand fixed cross between the new moon in Taurus, Black Moon Lilith, Pluto, and Mars. This is it's extremely volatile. This is a power struggle. It's explosive. It is fixed energies all trying to pull in 4 different directions. What I find interesting is that the new moon in Taurus is ruled by Venus, because Venus is a Taurus ruled sign, and she will actually be at her degree of maximum exaltation in the whole zodiac, 28 Pisces. And this is another water sign. This shows us something about compassion, about a higher love and a connection to the divine and the truth that everything is connected. And this is part of the medicine that Black Moon Lilith reveals through pushing us to these extremes, through her wrathful protective function as an avatar, as a goddess, as a deity, but also as a archetypal and mythic and quantum force, is that everything is connected, and that when we deny and repress and refuse to meet that, the consequences will be these extreme experiences that push us to a threshold. They push us to the point of no return, psychically and emotionally, in order to purge and reveal the consequences. When we work with exalted Lilith, she becomes an extremely liberating force, very, very liberating for those around us, very powerful in terms of healing fertility issues, the trauma from sexual and psychological abuse, mental health issues, environmental issues. You know, with Lilith and Scorpio, we're also picking up on the poisoning, the way that toxicity has built up in our systems. In various different ways, like physically, but also mentally and emotionally. So that that new moon, not to mention the nodes of fate are involved, there being aspects. It's a very, very powerful new moon coming up on the 28th. And it's also my lunar return. The moon will be right where my own moon is as well. So a very potent day. Oh, one more thing happening, and I can't believe I haven't spoken about Algol yet. Algol is a fixed star in the constellation of Perseus. Basically, Perseus holding the beheaded Medusa's head in his hand, and this red blinking eye of the beheaded Medusa. This is Algol. Algol, in a few different traditions, relates to being the demon star, Al Ghul, this very wrathful, feminine, like heads will roll, extremely protective, extremely dangerous. And Uranus, the Great Awakener, will be exactly conjunct Algol, also on that Taurus new moon. So the story of Medusa and the story of Lilith are very connected. And I do notice that Algol has a very strong Lilith flavor to it, often shows up in aspect to Black Moon Lilith in people's charts. So yeah, that's powerful too. I mean, the dark feminine is going to be very, very loud. There will be power struggles. There will be clashes of authority. There will be transformative extreme experiences. I think watching the news on that day is going to be super interesting. These Mars Pluto oppositions are always pretty full on, you know. So that's the 28th of April. And then we're going to have a Scorpio full moon, as we do. I'm not going to go into that right now. We're coming up to time. I'm going to go more into the key dates of this transit in the masterclass. I do hope that for those of you who feel called to the myth of Lilith, if you have these kind of looping patterns in your life around any of the themes that I have talked about today, anything regarding these kind of obsessive, manipulative, dark, abusive, painful experiences of the feminine, but also the way to integrate and liberate the primal undomesticated force of the feminine, to reintegrate her, to bring these themes back into, like, there will always be experiences of extremes. There will always be times when we just find ourselves way out past the known, way out past our capacity to be in control or to understand or digest. Like, trauma is part of the evolutionary spiral too. And yet what I've discovered in my work with Lilith is that she truly, I just forgot that I was on camera, that's probably good. She truly is one of the most potent healing forces at this time on earth. When we are facing climate crises, when we are, you know, recognizing the cultural, environmental, and widespread social impact of colonization, of war, and displacing people that have a really true living connection, an animist connection with nature, with the heavens, with the earth, with the plants, with the animal, with the waters. Recognizing what that does to everybody. And this kind of, like, when we talk about demonic possession, in my shamanic work, I spent most of the last 10 years training with traditional healers in the Peruvian Amazon. In fact, it was the plants of the jungle that got me into astrology, showing me that I needed to learn about the planets. Those fragments of unintegrated psychic and emotional shadow feeding off pain, continuing to grow darker and stronger in the shadows, because and they take on a life of their own. And Lilith can show up like this, don't get me wrong. I don't suggest that anybody starts like invoking Lilith willy-nilly. It's really just, you can just go crazy. It can just completely overwhelm your system, and you can be way, way out of your depth. But acknowledging that this terrain exists, acknowledging that there are things that you are too scared to admit that they turn you on, or that they even happened. You know, there's this disgust that lives in the depths of Scorpio. And it's If we want to live in a truly free world, we are on this long walk home all together, I believe, on this planet and the consciousness of this planet to reconcile the split that happened even 5,000 years ago when Lilith in ancient Sumeria became the dark maid and fled to the desert and became the Lilitu, you know, these unhinged aspects of the self. They are as much a part of everything as the more pleasant and palatable and favorable parts. So thank you for having me, Shireen. I hope that you've enjoyed this. And you can visit my website, pathoftherose.com, to register for Deeper Waters, the Lilith and Scorpio Masterclass. It will be happening on the 28th of April, the Taurus new moon. I also have a self-guided 4-week ritual journey with Lilith for those who want to go deeper, who want to actually work with her current to digest and dissolve and unbind and exalt her themes and energies within the psychosomatic and mythic body. That's on my website. I do readings, I run retreats, I do all sorts of stuff. But for now, thank you for being here. Many blessings. Water is life. And I hope that wherever you are receiving just the medicine you need. Blessings. Thank you.